Hi there, Rick here. Um, I bought a book today at Indigo Chapters. Okay. I just started reading it, um, probably into maybe about 10 pages. Okay. Um, so this kind of interests me a bit. Okay. The book is called Gold, Grit, and Guns. Okay. Miners on BC Fraser River in 1858. Okay. That's a long time ago. Um, how many years is that? Um, about 170 years ago, something like that. Um, in the early 1850s in California, there was already um, prospectors, okay, mining for gold in California. And then in 1858, a lot of those miners, okay, they headed north into British Columbia and they brought those skills, okay, to mine in BC, British Columbia. Um, what I found interesting was, okay, there was this one quotation in the book how this one miner, he was earning um, about $1,000 every 2 months. Okay, you have to remember 1858. Wow, that was a lot of money. Okay, um, because I know in 1899, um, $5 was equivalent to about $200 today. Yeah, I think actually $250 today. Okay, so you're talking what about yeah, an additional 42 years earlier than that time. Okay, so I'm sure um, what is it? $5 um, would have bought you a lot of stuff back then. Okay, just to take a guess how much a lot of things were. Okay, a meal, a bath. Okay, I think it probably equated to a few cents, not even 5 cents or 10 cents. Because I know back in I think 1899, bath was only 10 cents or 5 cents, right? You're talking about cents for a lot of different things. Okay, um, and you have to remember, okay, you had $1,000 in 1858. Um, just to take a guess, what how much money that would equate to, um, back then. Okay, um, yeah, it was probably like having about uh, gee, I was gonna say uh, about $30,000 on you, maybe more. If you had $1,000 in 1858, I think it would have been about equivalent to about $30,000. But I know that you could have probably bought a lot of stuff with $1,000 back then. And these gold miners were making that in what, 2 months of work? Okay. Um, it's quite amazing. Okay. Um, so there was the author, okay, is Alexander Globe, okay, and he's basing the book on four journals, okay, that that he discovered, okay. There's very little uh, kind of like written uh, just things written back then, okay, because he got the diaries of four men, so he's kind of like using those diaries to kind of like write the book and just describe how things were, right? And Then just looking back in time, 170 years ago, what life was like for somebody, uh, growing up in that era, right? Um, you have to remember there was no roads. Okay, um, a lot of these prospectors, they had a mule. They packed, kind of like their life savings uh, on the mules. Okay, and that was everything that they owned. Okay, um, I think there was see, even now I'm going to uh, the smaller settlements. Okay, banks were basically intense. Imagine going to your local bank and it's a tent, right? Um, I know in 1899, a lot of people were still like, I'm talking about in the smaller communities in BC. Okay, I could see people living in tents or just little shacks. It looked like a bunch of boards were just kind of like nailed together with some metal as roofing, and that was your home. So things were very different back then. Okay, and even I think the law of the merchants. Okay, um, I wouldn't be surprised. Uh, it just was very simple. Okay, what I mean by that is the buildings were just built with pretty um, bare wood, right? And because you have to remember, this is 1858. Um, there's some, I'm sure even a lot of pictures from that era, just didn't survive the kind of like the years that you know um, came before it, right? Probably a lot of photos were destroyed or just lost or in such poor condition that um, it just couldn't be used for like a modern book for like today, right? Okay, there's some very simple maps. Okay, um, but it's interesting just looking back in time, right? Because it kind of like, okay, when I'm reading it, it just kind of like it makes me feel that, okay, I'm in that time period of 1858. Okay, um, I'm sure that around the world, you know, um, it was probably very interesting just seeing what life was like in other countries, right? Um, imagine what it was like in United States or even um, what's that other, Japan, China, um, India. Um, because you have to remember, okay, there was no roads, there was no power lines, there was no telephones yet. You know, it's uh, it was such a early time period that life was just very simple, right? Um, schools, for that matter. Um, I think a lot of people, they didn't even go to. Well, I was gonna say maybe they went to school for a few years, maybe just 2 or 3 years to learn how to read and write. But even back then, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think there was that many schools in BC. Maybe back in Europe, yes, but not in BC because the province was still, the country as a whole was still developing, right? So I'm gonna make another video, when I just read further into the book. But I hope you find it interesting because so far I found it pretty interesting. So I've started reading further into the book, and found some interesting things here. Okay, this is in Victoria. Okay, um, in that year, okay, 344 buildings, okay, made of wood went up. Okay, um, much of the countryside was still covered with tents. Okay, um, says here Victoria had expanded to 4 miles across, with much of the countryside covered with tents. I kind of laugh at that a bit just because, okay, I've been to Victoria. I see how big the city is right now, right? Um, says here that the lots, okay, were 60 feet by 120 feet. And they sold for between $25 to $75 a lot. Yeah, that cheap, 1858, okay? Um, you have to remember, okay, some of these prospectors, gold miners, was making what, $1,000 in 2 months. So you could have bought what? Um, well, you could have bought 10 lots. Um, what you had made in like just 2 months of working, right? And then they were just saying here, okay, says half lots were rented from $250 to $400 per month. Okay, so if you put up a home there, yeah, rent was I was gonna say very expensive. Because you have to remember this was 1858, right? Um, What's Northern Light newspaper reported that some old Sacramento friends had made $100,000 selling lots to each other at Victoria. Okay. Wow, there was even some people making $100,000 back then. You have to remember this is 1858, remember, okay? I'll just show you some of the money, okay, that they were using back then, okay? Um, okay, this is, okay, it's a worn American $50 used by anonymous Canadian miner on the Fraser River in 1858. Imagine, okay, having a coin like that, okay, today. Just the numismatic value of it alone, I would think, okay, if it was in good condition, I could see it fetching over $100,000, maybe even a few $100,000. Okay, because how many of these coins survived through the ages since 1858? Maybe a dozen, 12. I don't think. I think even was it Spanish coins, Spanish gold, okay, was circulating around North America that during that time too. Okay, but it's interesting, seeing what people were using for money, way back then, about 170 years ago. I thought the United States started minting coins in 1875 actually, because it says United States of America on it. Okay, but um, it says is a half dollar. Okay, but um, United States was minting coins even earlier than 1875. Okay, but I'm sure they weren't minting that many. Okay, um, just to take a guess, I wouldn't be surprised it was in the thousands. Okay, not like today. You know, um, they're minting millions of coins. Okay, but I know that San Francisco was minting coins because they were saying how some of the miners brought some gold back to the San Francisco Mint, to be minted into some coins. So yeah, there was some places in the United States were minting coins.